Welcome to the 2024 K-State Garden Hour webinar series. We are so glad you're here. This webinar series started in 2020 and has been a collaboration of the entire K-State Horticulture Extension team. Since the start of the program, we have reached over 62,000 gardeners just like you. We are pleased to continue offering the K-State Garden Hour webinar series for free. If you have enjoyed these educational webinars, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support this program. The link to donate can be found in the chat or on our K-State Garden Hour website. This webinar is hosted by Kansas State Research and Extension. My name is Abby Drought, and I am the Food Crops Horticulture Agent in Sedum County, Kansas. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticulture education or a related discipline, but most of all, we have each have a love for educating and sharing important gardening topics. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to the presentation. This is where we will look for questions at the end of the webinar during the Q&A session. You should see a button along the bottom tab that says Q&A. Just click on that and you will be able to enter your question. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will post it to our K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to each topic as well. If we share links through the chat, we will also link them on the website. Our website is also where you will have access to previous topics and upcoming topics in the 2024 series. Our moderators today are Pam Paulson and Lane Weens, and they will be sharing information through the chat during the presentation. They will also help us facilitate the Q&A portion of the webinar. Today's topic is success with cacti and succulents. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Calla Edwards. Please give us a few moments while we transition and share the presentation slides.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Calla Edwards, and I am the Horticulture Extension Agent for Butler County. So I am based out of El Dorado. And today I'm going to talk to you about success with cacti and succulents. So if you've ever heard me talk, you'll know I quite literally grew up in a greenhouse. My parents owned a nursery and garden center for about 30 years when I was a kid. So I had the opportunity to be exposed to a lot of different types of plants off and on throughout the years. And I remember one of my first experiences with a succulent or cacti. My grandpa, a close family friend, had a giant jade plant that he kept in about a whiskey barrel sized planter. So you can imagine how big this jade was that he kept out on his sunroom. And it bloomed every single year. It was simply gorgeous and simply stunning. And so that was really one of my first memories of being around cactus and succulents. And I have his plant to this day. I will admit that I am one that struggled a little bit keeping succulents, especially alive, for a while until I kind of figured them out. I had a lot of success, of course, with tropical plants, but if you've had both of them, you know that the care between the two is very different. So I still have, as I said, Grandpa's jade plant to this day. It is a little smaller than it used to be. When I taught high school ag, I had a couple students in my horticulture class that were a little overzealous with the water. So it's a little smaller than it used to be, but it's still doing really great. So we're going to talk about a variety of different cacti and succulents today. And talk about what the definition is. And then I'm going to end the program with maybe some less common ones or some ones that are great for newbies and people to work with. But so with that, let's get started today. Now, I hear succulents described a lot of times. But when I talk to people, oftentimes they don't truly know what a succulent actually is. And in reality, they think that a succulent is a specific type of plant. It's a specific collection of plants, when it actually is better described as a characteristic of a plant rather than a specific type. There are quite a few of our families of plants that actually have at least one succulent in them, even if the entire family is not truly a succulent. So succulents are characteristic in actuality. And what they are is a plant that has a modified or swollen plant part that is designed to hold water. When we think of cacti and succulents, a lot of times we think of really hot, arid, dry locations. But that's not always the case. So they do have those modified plant parts. Typically, we think of leaves, but some succulents actually have swollen roots. And then if we think of a cactus doesn't actually have leaves as we think of them typically at all. So their main part that holds water is their stem. Now, there are thousands of different types of succulents all over the world. In the cacti family alone, there's over 2,000 different species of succulents. And in the ice plant family, there's an additional 2,000 different species of succulents. Those two families combined make up about 40% of the species of succulents that we can find all over the world. So there are thousands of species. One of the questions that we had in our open poll is, where are cacti from? What continent are cacti from? So if you answered the Americas in that poll question, you would be correct. All but one of those 2,000 species, maybe two of those 2,000 species of cactus, are found in North, Central, and South America. So we've got a lot of native cacti and succulents that we can use. Now, in reality, they are found on every continent except Antarctica. And Antarctica is for obvious reasons. But we can find a succulent to fit basically any and every growing condition that you might have, whether that is something you want in your house, whether you want to use them as a houseplant, or whether you want to use them in a landscape design. But as we see in this picture, succulents really can be quite eye-catching, no matter where you use them. Now, starting in 2007, now succulents have always been popular, but they really started to gain in popularity in about 2007. And that was in part because of the millennial generation. They really latched on to succulents at that point in time for several reasons. And in the last nursery industry survey that was sent out that divided succulents from houseplants, in 2017, about 15% of all garden sales were succulents of some kind. Now, they don't divide those two out anymore, so I don't have those exact numbers, but I would guess that that number has continued to rise, especially with the houseplant boom in the early 2020s. And there are several reasons why succulents gained popularity, became very popular. They are very low maintenance. So if you are somebody that has a really busy lifestyle, if you're somebody maybe that travels for work or is out of town for extended periods of time, succulents were the ideal plant. You didn't necessarily have to have somebody come in and water for you or take care of them, because succulents can go weeks without water, depending on the variety. And this low maintenance, put here under love me, that's one of the easiest ways to kill a succulent, is to overlove it and to provide it with too much water. The other reason that succulents became very popular is, in general, they have few pest and disease issues. With the exception of potentially some root or leaf rots, they don't get many diseases. And because of their structure, because of the skin and things that they typically have very few pest diseases. With my succulents at home, my biggest issue typically has been mealybugs. I'll have a couple that will get some mealybugs on them every once in a while, but in general, they are relatively simple to care for and they don't have a lot of issues. The other reason they became so popular and they continue to be so popular is there are so many options. If we think back to that previous picture where we had different varieties of echeverias there, they came in purples and yellows, they can be green, they can be variegated. You can have some that are only a couple inches tall, up to some that get 8, 9, 10 feet tall, even as a house plant. So succulents really have so many options for them. Now, succulents most commonly are thought of as houseplants. Sometimes we like to try and stick them in a box. And succulents really don't fit in a box very well because you can use them in so many different ways. They have so many different care requirements in some instances too, but they work equally well as houseplants. But you can also use a lot of succulents out in your landscape in a couple different ways. And we'll talk about those as we go along. But if you look at this picture, this is an aloe. No, there is not a filter on this particular plant. It is simply that stunning in real life. Now, I know several of you will have some questions. I cannot give you a one-size-fits-all perfect way to care for your succulents. And the reason for that is everyone has different water, everyone has different light. Your home conditions in terms of humidity are going to be different. Different succulents need different types of care. So the best thing I can tell you with a succulent, if you are caring for it, especially indoors, is to make sure you take a look at the origin of that plant. Because a cacti is going to require very different care than a holiday cactus. They're both in the cactus family. We would think that they would need the same care, but a holiday cacti is a tropical cactus that lives in a tropical rainforest or temperate rainforest and gets far more water than a cactus that lives in a desert. So the best thing I can do for you is to tell you to research the origin of that plant and do your best to mimic those conditions indoors. With any succulent species, no matter what type you are growing, light is going to be one of the biggest limiting factors that you can have. Most of our succulents prefer as much light as you can possibly give them. So if you're going to grow them in a house, in a household setting, your south or west window, if there aren't any trees or porches, is going to be your best windows to grow those plants in. Now, if you don't have great windows, you can still grow succulents and have them do very well inside. You will just need to supplement those plants with some additional light. And the good thing about succulents is they will tell you in many instances if they're not getting enough light. They will start to stretch, they will elongate because they are actively searching for more light. You'll see them start to bend or to twist towards the light. So you can use lights. In my home, I use fluorescent light fixtures because that's what I have. Once those stop working or once those are broke, I will transition them probably over to LEDs, but I'm kind of a cheap gardener. I'm going to use what I have until I can't use it anymore. Also, if you have succulents in a window, make sure you turn them periodically so that they are not, because they will bend towards the light as well. So if you want them to grow upright, make sure you are turning them periodically. Now on my slide, I said underlove your succulents. So the easiest way to kill them is to overwater them. They prefer a coarse, really well-draining mix. Typically, succulents have a fairly shallow root system. They don't have, because of where they're from, they don't have the need for a really deep root system as some of our other plants do. So allow that soil to dry out as far down as you can. Otherwise, you may have some damp soil sitting at the bottom that can lead to some root rots above it. I mentioned we had my grandpa's jade plant. That's what ultimately happened with that is the top was drying out, but the middle to the bottom half of that soil wasn't. And so that particular plant got some root rot, and unfortunately, I did lose a fair amount of it. Now, one of the ways that I check my succulents now, it's a lesson learned, to make sure that they are dry enough to water, is I use what I call the chopstick test. So I will stick a wooden chopstick, a small dowel rod, anything you have that's long enough to go all the way to the bottom of that pot. And I will stick it in the pot. Give it about 30 minutes, maybe an hour in there, and then come back and pull that stick out. If the bottom is damp, or if that stick is damp at any point, I need to wait to water that particular plant. Unfortunately, succulents aren't necessarily one of those plants that you can water on a schedule. I actually have some plants that when I bring them indoors in the fall, I water them once throughout the winter. Because that's all they need. If I water them any more than that, they start to have some root issues on me. I don't typically use a moisture meter. For me, I haven't found them to always be as accurate as I would like. So I'm a little old school. I do use that wooden chopstick to test the soil. I only fertilize succulents when they're actively growing. Again, if we think about the location where many of our succulents come from, they don't come from great soil. So they don't need a full strength fertilizer. They don't need a lot of fertilizer. So I only fertilize mine typically from that late April through September timeframe. And then I just water them with regular water from then on out. Now, most of our succulents love to be moved outside in the summer. And in that April timeframe, I'm really grateful I have a sunroom that I can move my houseplants out to. So starting in April after our frost-free date, I will move my plants out into that sunroom and leave them there for a couple weeks to start to acclimate to the changing temperatures, to get used to that direct sunlight in a slightly shaded location. And then starting sometime in May, once our evening temperatures are warm enough, I actually will move them outside in the summer and slowly acclimate them to being in full sun. And my succulents absolutely love that. That gives them the closest to their natural environment that I can give. Now, there are some plants that I don't do this with, and that includes my tropical holiday cactus. So I have a couple big true Christmas cactus and then some Thanksgiving cactus, and I move them outside, but I leave them in a shadier location. Again, they're kind of from a rainforest setting, so they get bright filtered light, but they typically don't get direct light. And our Kansas afternoons can easily burn them. So that's one of my keys with how I keep my succulents happy. I say they survive in the winter, and then I get them to thrive outside in the summer. Now, outdoor succulents, there are many succulents that you can grow outdoors in Kansas all 365 days out of the year. And the key with those, many of them are sedums, although we've got some hennin chicks and some cactus as well, is to give them as much sun as you possibly can. Again, that's their native natural environment. So the more sun you can give them, the better. The other problem sometimes is depending on the plant you are trying to grow, you may need to amend the soil. Where I'm from right now in Butler County, we have a lot of clay content to our soil. And so sometimes that soil holds more water than those plants prefer. So if I plant my succulents outside, I do try and amend the soil. My soil especially is not the best, so I try and add in some additional organic material to the soil. Now, if you have a high clay content to your soil, do not add sand to it. That's not going to help your soil. It's actually going to hurt it. So I recommend a soil test, potentially taking a good look at your soil before you plant any succulents outside. Now, one of the pushes the last few years has been for plants that are low water use. And you really can't get any lower water use than a succulent. But even succulents need water. So if we have an extended drought period, you will want to water those succulents in. A good way, another way to tell if your succulents need water is to let the leaves or stems tell you. So many succulents, when they start to get too dry, they'll start pulling that water out of their leaves. So if you feel the leaf and it still feels really firm, you can probably wait to water, but if the leaves starting to get a little shriveled, get a little soft, that's another sign that you may need to water. Another thing to remember, smaller leaved succulents need more water than ones with really big leaves because they can't hold as much water as some other plants do. So that's another one of my mistakes that you can try to learn from so you don't make it with your own plants. Now, one of the benefits about succulents and why I mentioned they typically are very cost effective and very inexpensive is they, for the most part, are very easy to propagate. The key with propagating any succulent is to allow the plants to callus. So if you take a stem cutting or a leaf cutting, let them lay out for about 4 to 7 days. That lets that end kind of harden over, so you're less likely to have issues with rotting. But that 4 to 7 days is great. Now, most succulents are easy to start from stem or leaf cuttings. Either one will work in many instances. Some people prefer stem cuttings because they think it gets you a plant faster because you're already starting with a part of a plant. And as with any plant propagation, you want to have a minimum of 1 to 2 nodes where the leaves attach to that stem in order to have plenty of places for roots and for new branches to go. Now, leaf cuttings, it's kind of a unique thing for many of our succulents. Many you can start with leaf cuttings, and after you've let them callus, you can lay them on top of the soil, and over time, these little baby plants and roots will start to form. And you can keep getting new plants with just a simple leaf. Now, this version does take a little longer than a stem cutting because the plant is creating a brand new plant. It works really well. Now, there are a couple plants that stem and leaf cuttings are not effective on. Desert rose is one of the plants that I'll talk about a little bit later. And you can start them from stem cuttings. They don't grow from leaf cuttings, but you can grow them from stem cuttings. However, those stem cuttings typically do not develop that enlarged base that a desert rose is famous for. So to get that, you have to propagate by seed, or for many of the propagators, they actually will graft the desired species onto a rootstock to get that enlarged base. Now, division is also a very popular one. Aloes are plants that are famous for division because there are some succulents and some cacti that produce offsets, or they produce little babies or runners, and that allows them to spread out. And that's a really easy way to divide and to create new plants as well through propagation. Now, succulents can be used in the landscape in a variety of ways. I had the opportunity, along with quite a few of our other horticulture agents across the state to travel to Colorado. And there were several succulents that were used in a landscape in a variety of ways. So rock gardens are a really unique way if you're looking for a low water landscape. You can do a rock garden with some of our native cacti and succulents or hard eye cacti and succulents, and have kind of a unique, cool landscape. In my part of the state, we have a lot of limestone. We've got a lot of rock that's close to the surface. And so making kind of a cool little rock garden is really pretty easy. Now, something you can do with any of your landscaping with succulents, because often the really colorful ones, the ones that have unique shapes, like the ghost cactus in the middle, they're not hardy year round in our state. But often you can do what we call is a pot in a pot method. So when you're developing your landscape, what you do is you bury a pot in the ground, and then during the growing season, you slip another pot in it with the plant planted in. And then in the fall, when it starts to get cool, you can pull that pot out with the plants and you can take it inside to bring it back outside again in the summer the next year. So that is a way to have some of the more unique, non-native, non-hardy plants out in a rock type garden. Some people will also plant succulents out in the gardens and just treat them like an annual and recognize that they aren't going to make it over the winter. Now, as far as cacti gardens, coming up here in a minute, I'm going to talk about some of our native cactus that would make a beautiful cactus garden. That again is that low water, low maintenance use. But we saw some really cool ones when we were at the Denver Botanic Gardens. There were some really unique, cool plants out there. Now, succulents can also be used in your general landscaping. If a rock garden or a cacti garden is not your idea of landscape, there are several hardy succulents and cacti that you can incorporate in your general landscaping. One of my jobs as a kid, when my parents had a garden center, was to go out and trim back the ground cover sedums to start new sedums for them to sell and use in their landscaping. So there are quite a few sedums that are hardy that are both short and tall, along with some other plants as well that we'll get into here in a few more slides. But again, succulents don't just have to be a house plant. It can be used outside. A lot of my succulents I actually use as decorative patio pots. Again, many of them love the heat and the sun. I have an African milk tree similar to the one in this picture that I move outside every summer, and I swear it gains about 6 inches to a foot every single time I move it outside because it absolutely loves the heat and the sun that we get. So it makes a really cool, colorful patio decoration that I can have outdoors. And, you know, succulents, like I said, it can be small, but we can see this one is basically the height of a door. So they can also get very large if you allow them to. And there are some specimens that do make simply gorgeous pots. The African milk tree is the one in this picture. You can also get some with purple colored leaves. Flapjack is a type of kalanchoe. It has the large kind of bluish colored leaves. It gets the name because the leaves look like flapjacks or pancakes. And then one of my absolute favorites, I love the desert rose plant. This is one that actually gets trumpet-shaped flowers, so it makes a wonderful, wonderful patio planter that is attractive to look at as well as kind of cool to look at throughout the year. Now, I will admit I love making fairy gardens and doing craft projects and different projects with succulents. And so these were some cool ones that I've seen over the years. The birdhouse is actually from one of my master gardeners. She had this old birdhouse that wasn't good for a bird anymore, but she turned it into this gorgeous planter. This particular year, she had some sedums and burrows tails and different plants in there. But she's also done some hardy hen and chicks and different things in that particular planter as well. Like I said, I love doing fairy gardens. And I've done some with succulents and cacti as well. I did one that was a desert theme one year that I really enjoyed, although the sand that I had on top kept wanting to wash away whenever I'd water it. So this is a cool feature where you don't have to do that desert theme to use cacti and succulents in this manner. And then the succulent logs, especially ones that use hen and chicks so that they're able to stay outside all year round in our Kansas winters, are always so cool to me just because they are a unique planter and a great way to recycle some different materials. And the cool thing about doing any of these projects is you don't necessarily have to buy new plants. I know there was some of you in the chat that had quite a few succulents. You can start your own succulents to make these projects pretty inexpensively. Just a couple others that I wanted to showcase. If you're looking for a project to do with kids this fall around that Halloween, Thanksgiving time, these little flat pumpkins make great planters, actually. So what you do with these particular ones is you actually glue the moss on top of them and then glue the succulents to the top, and you can kind of spritz those to keep them damp. And then when it's time for the pumpkin to be thrown away, you just peel that off and plant it in a pot. So that's kind of a unique project. You can use them in wreaths. This is one of my goals to do one day, is to make a succulent wreath to hang on my back patio where it gets plenty of light. But these use a regular wreath frame, and you can either stuff them with just a moss, or you can line the frame with moss and then fill it with potting soil and stick your succulent cuttings in there like that. And then I love Christmas too. And these living Christmas ornaments are one of my favorite things to do, that you can stick some little succulents in there, use some of these unique little berries as well to add in, to give you kind of a living Christmas ornament. So this was a gift to me by one of my friends a couple Christmases ago. And I did plant the plants in there. They did live for a while. Unfortunately, they are no longer living because I have killed more plants than I have ever owned, as I think most of us that are involved in horticulture can say. So now what I'm sure a lot of you have been wanting to hear about, we're going to talk about some succulents that you can use both indoors and outdoors. And the first few are native to the United States and native to the state of Kansas. So these are some that you could add into your landscape today. The hedgehog cactus is a really unique one. This one actually can be found in Barber County and some of the western counties in Kansas, as well as a variety of different states in the United States. This is a small cactus variety, so this is not one that gets very tall. They stay fairly short and they spread out and produce little colonies as they grow. They also have a fairly shallow root system, as most of our cactus and most of our plants do. So if you're going to grow them in a flower bed or going to grow them in a pot, remember they don't need a really deep location. I actually had a start of a hedgehog cactus for a while. We were visiting some family again in Barber County, and we were walking through a pasture, and I came back with a little piece of hedgehog cactus stuck to my jeans that day. Took it home to Northeast Kansas, rooted it, and it lived in my sandbox actually for quite a few years. So this one does have some flowers. Has pink flowers in the spring. Again, it's a very hardy plant and one that you could add into your landscape. The tree cholla is native to the desert region and also western Kansas. So if you're looking for a taller cactus type plant, this is one that you can gets 3 to 8 feet tall. It forms these really dense thickets, so it kind of grows as a bush, I would say, is the best way to describe it. We saw a few of these while we were also out in Denver, and some of them are, if you see in the picture, they all have some thorns. Some of them have fewer thorns than others. You can find these where they have so many thorns, they kind of look a little fuzzy, but I definitely wouldn't touch them. The ones that are native to Western Kansas have yellow blooms. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of the yellow bloom version. There are also some that have pink blooms as well. So this would be one that you could add into your a landscape planting to add some height to a backdrop as well. Prickly pear cactus. So these are, again, native to the United States. You can actually find them in quite a few parts of the state of Kansas. They are also, I will, from previous experience, tripping and falling hand first into one of those is not recommended. It can happen, but it's not recommended. So if you're going to plant a cactus, do be aware of where you plant them. So they're not in a location where there maybe is a ton of traffic, where you could hurt yourself or others. They have flat paddle-shaped stems. So most cactus do have leaves that come out in the spring, but they tend to be fairly short-lived, and they fall off fairly quickly because they're a site of water loss for the plant. So the plant doesn't hold on to them for an extended period of time. Native ones are green, and depending on where you get your native ones, some of them can be more upright growing, similar to this picture, while others tend to lay a little flatter and are a little more prostrate to the ground. So it all depends kind of on the type of prickly pear cactus. They also come in purple. I've seen some simply gorgeous purple ones. It's not quite K-State purple, but it's a beautiful color nonetheless. And they can also be variegated. So we often think of prickly pear cactus being very maybe bland looking, but there's a lot of unique ones out on the market that are hardy for our area. They do bloom in the spring and summer. We can see in the picture there's some spent blooms on the right-hand side. Most of them have white to yellow to orange colored flowers, depending on the species and depending on where they're growing. But this is another one to add. Now, Hidden Chicks has the reputation as the hardiest succulent that I've had really on my list so far. And I give them that reputation because they grow to very cold temperatures. We had some people who grew them in North Dakota, grew the hardy varieties in North Dakota, and they were simply gorgeous. Most of them, however, are native to the African and Arabian peninsulas. They get the name Hidden Chicks is probably the most common name that we have heard, but another nickname for them is actually the house leek. And they get that name in Europe and England. They would either get thrown up on the roof or some would accidentally end up in the thatch that they put on the roof, and they would grow as a ground cover in the thatch on the roofs. So Hidden Chicks or house leek is another name for them. These are a wonderful ground cover because they spread out via stolons to form the little offsets or chicks. So they slowly but surely can fill a location over time. And you can speed that up by breaking off some of those chicks, those little offsets, and spreading them out so that they have less ground to cover. These do have blooms, so they have star-shaped blooms that are also very popular with pollinators. Now, with Hidden Chicks, you have to be a little careful of what you buy because there are hardy and there are non-hardy hen and chicks. So when you're purchasing them, make sure you check what zone it is hardy to, because not all of them will survive over winter in our location. But they come in a variety of different shapes and colors. You can see kind of a bluish to green. There's some little tiny, almost black ones in this particular picture, along with the reddish color as well. And because they have so much variety, I had to include a second slide in them. Some of them have this cool cobweb look. Um, that's a feature to help them lose less moisture, so to lose less water in hot, dry climates. They also come in that red. The red is simply stunning. And then this purpley blue color as well. But again, some of the really brightly colored ones are not hardy in our location, but they're definitely something that you could plant in a pot and plant out in a flower bed outside to bring inside. Now, I remember when tall sedums first hit the market. My parents were so excited about them to come to the garden center. They are another one of our hardy succulents. They started to become popular in the 1990s, is when they first hit the market. And with the original, the Autumn Joy, was probably the old standby, the favorite for many, many years. And since then, they have developed a variety of new, unique varieties that range in a variety of colors, from purple to variegated with leaves. The flowers can also be a different range of colors as well. These guys are about 12 to 24 inches tall. Again, they like really well-drained soils. And if you're looking for a fall blooming plant, late summer fall blooming plant that is loved by the butterflies and the bees, these guys will simply be covered in that late fall, that fall time frame, which is so important for our pollinators. Now, one of the negatives that I've heard about these tall sedums is they can get floppy. And oftentimes when they get what we term floppy, where they want to fall over, that's a sign that they may be in a location that holds too much moisture, or they're not getting enough sunlight. But again, that stems falling over is pretty common in a location that has too much water. And that was more common on some of the older varieties. The newer varieties is maybe doesn't happen as much. One of the easy ways to fix that is to use a support system to put around those plants so that they aren't able to flop over. Now, it doesn't hurt them. It just may make them a little unsightly, and they could cover up some plants that you want to get more light. Now, the ground cover sedums, these are the ones I talked about being one of my jobs as a kid, of going out and trimming them back. My parents planted some of these specifically at their house so that they could take cuttings to sell at the garden center. They are, again, a hardy succulent. They grow about 9 inches tall. Some of them may have slightly taller bloom stalks, but they're typically a fairly low growing plant. So they're great in that front of a flower bed location, or in a really rocky, poor soil site that has really shallow soils. They do very well there. Leaf color ranges from, again, a green to a yellow to purple to variegated, depending on the variety. Again, they are loved by the butterflies and bees, and like many of the succulents that we have talked about and cactus earlier, they're very easy to propagate, so you can quickly cover a lot of ground with these particular plants. You can see there's a variety of different sedums. Now, not all of them may be 100% hardy in our area. They are typically a pretty hardy succulent. But you can see some of these have really small leaves. So if you're using them indoors as a house plant, these smaller leaved sedums are going to need more watered more often anyway than the larger leafed ones. Now, the hardy ice plant, I hadn't had a chance to see this one actually in person until last week when I was in Denver. They use this in their botanic gardens and in some of the different city gardens fairly frequently. Again, it's a very hardy succulent. It's hardy to zone 5 to 9. It's again one of those that's native to that Arabian and African peninsula. Um, it really puts on a show, like similar to this picture. It's again very low growing. It's 1 to 3 inches tall, so it makes a beautiful ground cover. Spreads about 1 to 2 feet wide, and it blooms in June to October. And when we were in Denver, I saw some of the purple. We also saw some of the white, the yellows, the reds. But this was simply putting on a show out in the Denver, Colorado area. So it would do very well in your location. And our last, I believe, of the hardy succulents, this is called fame flower. This is not one that's really well known, but it's becoming more popular, especially in Missouri, because it is a Missouri native. It is a hardy Missouri native, only gets about 6 to 8 inches tall. So again, it's one of those ground covers. The flowers range from rose pink to red, as we can see in this particular picture. And the name is because of the showy flower. It gets the nickname the fame flower because of that showiness. It does prefer well-drained soils. So again, make sure you may want to do some amendments to your soils as you go along. All right, now to some non-native ones, some non-hardy ones that make beautiful specimens that you can grow indoors and then move outside. The desert rose was a plant that was fairly popular not that long ago. I actually found several of my original ones in the Home Depot, Walmart, Lowe's at that point in time. Typically that white and two-tone pink flower. These guys are native to the Arabian Peninsula. They are actually in the milkweed family. So they are related somewhat to our native milkweeds, even though they obviously look nothing alike. They are well known for those trumpet-shaped flowers. The most common flower color is that two-tone white and pink. You can find them anywhere from white to a almost red-black color. And almost any shade in between. Sometimes they are single. You can also find them double. Again, they are known for that unique product. So you see that base with all the enlarged roots and the enlarged stems. That is what they are known for. So that is where they store their water. They don't store it in their leaves. If you look at the leaves in person, they're actually fairly thin. They look like a tropical houseplant leaf, but their stem is their storage device. Now again, with desert rose, if you start them from a cutting, most of the time they will not get this enlarged base. And the way, if you have a desert rose and you want to have a bigger base, the way you develop that is every time you repot them, you scrape the top inch of soil away and you raise that soil level an inch or two every time you pot them. So you expose more and more of that base and those roots out of the ground. They make a wonderful outdoor patio pot. Mine are actually getting ready to bloom right now, but I do move them inside in the winter. They will tolerate temperatures down in the 40s, but if it freezes, they're likely not to make it. I accidentally lost several of mine. The heater got unplugged in one of my in a sunroom in a house several years ago. And about 50% of mine survived and the other 50% did die. Now, word of caution with these desert rose, I absolutely love them. However, they are poisonous. So if you have children or pets that like to chew on plants, make sure you keep them away from those because these guys are fairly toxic. So I kept mine. I just moved them into the basement where my pets and my child couldn't ever go, at least until they were old enough to know not to chew on them. Now, this is a plant, when I move it indoors in the winter, I will water it maybe once around January 1st, and they seem to really love that. Now, if you want to keep them under a fluorescent light or in a bright window, you may have to water them a little more. They do go dormant kind of in the wintertime. The orchid cactus, the main one, the most common one, is known as Queen of the Night. So they are a night blooming cactus. They are an epiphyte, so they actually grow on another plant. They don't grow in the ground typically. They're another one of our tropical cactus. So they're not one that's going to want to be dry constantly. So keep that in mind. They have these large flat leaves. In their native habitat, they can grow up to 10 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So they can get huge. In a house, they typically don't get as big, but they can get very large. So that's something to keep in mind when you are wanting to start one or if you're going to get one. But they're very easy to start, to root and grow just by using one of those stems. Now, the Kalanchoe is probably one of the most common ones. They are grown either for their leaves or their flowers. So we've got a chocolate soldier on the top, and then we've got a blooming flowering Kalanchoe on the bottom. They're native to Madagascar and tropical Africa. There's about 120 different species, including the flapjack I mentioned earlier, chocolate soldier, the copper spoon, and then our mother of millions or mother of thousands are all in this family as well. It wouldn't be a succulent talk if I didn't talk about the Senecio species, genus. They are a very large genus that covers everything from upright shrubs to ground covers, and they are grown for their foliage. So this particular genus is home to your strings of, so pearls, beads, fish hooks, dolphins, whichever strings you want to talk about. But they're also home to blue chalkstick, which is this photo at the bottom. Sedums are best known for being outdoor plants, but like I mentioned earlier, there are many that make wonderful house plants. They are native to rocky, mountainous environments, and they come in a variety of shapes, colors, and sizes. So we've got the burro's tail, we've got some jelly beans up in here, a variety of different sedums. Again, remember, the smaller the leaf, the more water it needs. Then the African milk tree. I mentioned these guys earlier. They are native to Central Africa. They're actually related to our poinsettias. So that milk tree refers to that white sap that they have. They have unique triangle-shaped stems. So if you look at them from the top, they are going to be shaped like a triangle. They do have little tiny thorns to them where each of those leaves fall off. And they can be green to purple to variegated. This can be a very tall plant, up to 9 feet. If they start to get too tall, though, you can always chop stems off, and much like our other plants, they will grow side shoots and grow new arms. And with that, we've got a few minutes left for questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Calla. Yes, we do have quite a few questions here in the chat for you. So, first up, we got a baby cactus in a 1-ounce plastic container. It's hard to tell when to water since because of the very small amount of soil dries out quickly. How do we know when we should water?
I would say, so you say it dries out quickly. I would use that as your base. So we want the soil to dry out. I wouldn't water it the instant it dries out. I would wait, several days to a week afterwards, but use that soil drying out as your basis.
Fantastic. Okay. I've had problems with house finches eating tall sedum down to the stems. Any recommendations there?
So if you have house finches that are eating those, I'm assuming the leaves off of all the way back to the
I
stem,
believe that's what they're going for.
you may need to look at that netting that we use to cover fruit with, and cover those sedum with that to help protect them. That would be my best recommendation because there's not a product necessarily that would stop them, and we can't hurt house finches.
Perfect. Is there any shade tolerant succulents, like when you put them outside?
So if you're going to put them outside as a potted plant, um, those tropical cactus are going to be the ones that'll do best in that shady location because they're from a tropical rainforest, so they don't like direct sun. So your holiday cactus, that queen of the night, any of those tropical type cactus will do well in a shady location in the summer.
Perfect. Any recommendation on getting that big night blooming cactus to flower?
You know, that one I could tell you how to get a holiday cactus to flower, but I don't know how to get the queen of the night to flower.
I was just doing a little bit more research on this, and it looks like this is a little bit more of a tropical cactus. So North Carolina State recommends giving it just a little bit more water than you normally
Okay.
would for most other cacti.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
I've had a hard time growing Senecio, string of pearls, etc. Any tricks?
So it is probably what I've heard of as the most temperamental of the succulents. And my best recommendation is a little bit of trial and error. So I've had several, I've tried them in different places in my house. The happiest I have found with mine is I have them in an east window. They get direct sunlight all morning, and I water them when they start to get dry. Now, I haven't been brave enough to transplant them yet because I'm afraid if I transplant it, it will die on me just out of spite. But right now, that's where mine has been the happiest.
For sure. Okay. Maybe kind of a loaded question, but are euphorbia considered true succulents?
Some, I believe, some yes, some no.
Yeah, I think that one's pretty species dependent because even poinsettia is in euphorbia. So it's kind
Yep.
of
Yeah. So the
case by case
African,
basis.
yeah. Yeah, the African milk tree is a succulent, but I
Mhm.
don't consider a poinsettia a succulent. So
Perfect. Problems with rabbits eating succulents.
okay. Again, that I think is going to be a case of you're going to have to find a way to protect those either with some type of fencing or um, possibly a netting, much like with the birds.
Perfect. What's the secret to keeping a split rock alive? I believe they're talking about lithops there.
Living, yep. That one I can't tell you because that is one that I've tried a few times and I've killed every single one of them. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that one.
I've done a little bit of research on that in the past. I think they're one that's kind of temperamental when you water them. So
Mhm.
I don't think you want to water them during the winter because that's when they're dormant. That's not when they're really wanting to do anything. So,
Yep.
okay. One about squirrels. My Kalanchoe has a white powder-like substance on the leaves. It wipes off or washes off easily. Any ideas what that is or how to prevent it?
If it wipes off easily but comes back, it's most likely not an insect issue. Sometimes I've heard of if you have really hard water, it can be a mineral deposit on the leaves when the water evaporates off of the leaves or from the pores in the leaves, then it leaves those minerals on there. You might try watering with water that is not quite so hard. That might be an option.
Perfect. Can we do one more, Abby? Perfect. Okay, so you talked a little bit about taking succulents from inside outside, but this person's asking they always have issue bringing plants from outside in. About February, they start to look really, really sad. Any recommendations on moving them outside in this winter and fall?
Okay. So I actually treat, when I move my plants back in, I treat it like when I move them out. So I slowly acclimate them to lower levels of light so they get some of that shedding done. And then I try and provide as high a light as possible. I tend to keep my fluorescent lights about 4 inches above the top of my succulents when possible. They tend to need to be a little closer than tropical plants so that they get the light that they need. But again, some of mine start to look rough about that February timeframe. I said they survive inside in the winter to thrive outside in the summer. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Calla.
Thank you, Calla. We typically have more questions than we have time for, but we will be sure to link several articles related to this session on our website. We hope these resources will help to answer your questions, but if you need additional information, contact your local K-State Extension office. Once again, thank you for joining us for K-State Garden Hour webinar series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We are so glad you could be here today to learn about success with cacti and succulents. We are excited to continue offering this webinar series into 2024. Be watching your email for more details coming soon. You can visit the K-State Garden Hour website to view our recorded Garden Hour archive or to make a tax-deductible donation to support the continuation of this webinar series. This session was recorded and will be posted on the website by tomorrow afternoon. After this webinar ends today, you will receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please fill this out. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thank you again, and we hope you continue to tune in for the first Wednesday of each month, and have a great week.